Okay, thank you, Eve, for taking us through the turbulence, and for the tech team in the control room behind the scenes. Thank you to everybody for joining us. We were always going to have one little glitch, weren't we? So that's got that out of the way. Welcome, I'm Hayley Lever. I'm Exec Lead for GM Moving and Chief Exec at GreaterSport. Welcome back for those who are with us this morning, and to anybody who's joining us for the first time today. I hope you've had a good Monday so far. So we've had a great morning so far. We've shared the GM Moving in Action strategy. We've had some brilliant speakers who've really brought some of the priorities within the strategy to life, reminding us why GM Moving matters and clearly demonstrating why GM Moving needs our collective leadership as we work towards active lives for all. Here's a little reminder of what and who GM Moving is, with our launch film also launched this morning. And I'll give it a little plug here because it's a brilliant poem written by Eve Holt, who's with us today, and a great series of little short clips to really bring the strategy and our work together to life. So over to you, Kaz.
GM Moving is our shared movement for movement, our collective call to enable active lives for all. So we can all move more together, whatever the weather, so we can all move our way, whatever the day. Designing moving in to our places and spaces and increasing the smiles and the sweat on our faces. Putting the joy back in the journey, encouraging play on the way. Making sports more inclusive, removing the barriers, making our facilities fit for purpose for all abilities. Ensuring nothing is done about us without us, and helping each other to move more each day. Throw a stick for the dog, try a slow jog, take a walk as you talk. Fly a kite, take a hike, ride a bike, scooter or trike. Cleaning, gardening, DIY, or find something new and give it a try. Together we can find a way to design moving into everyone's day. So get involved, join in. Share your stories on WhatsApp, Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram or Twitter. What's brought you joy? What's made you fitter? A photo, a post, at home, in the park, provides inspiration, creates a ripple and a spark. Write moving into your policy. Put it on the agenda. It's your business too, whatever you do. Moving helps us to take notice, to give and to learn. Happier, healthier and more connected. Moving brings more benefits than we ever expected. Wherever you live, work and play, there's a way to move a little more every day. We are all GM movers, movers and shakers. It's who we are and it's what we do.
Thank you. I think I'm going to watch that every morning before I start work. It just brings a real smile to my face every time. So this morning was all about what needs to happen. And this afternoon is all about how, together, we can make active lives for all a reality over the next 10 years. And I'm delighted to introduce a panel of leaders who've all made a significant contribution to GM Moving already over recent years and who will continue to do so. So first of all, Andy Burnham. He doesn't really need any instructions, but I'll have a go. So Andy is the Mayor of Greater Manchester, King of the North, Great North Runner, good time by the way, and a new skateboarder extraordinaire. Andy's a long-standing champion and advocate of the importance of moving, of physical activity and sport as fundamental building blocks of population health, community, identity, the economy and the environment. So thanks, Andy, for joining us this afternoon. Jaweeda Idoo is a GP and partner at Alvanley Family Practice. She's chair of Stockport GP Federation and she leads on primary care networks for Greater Manchester Health and Social Care Partnership. Jaweeda's approach, with credit duly to Kay and Grandad Dave and the practice champions of Woodley, is spreading and growing across England as part of our integrated care work. Their genuinely personal and community-centred, strengths-based approach to health and wellbeing are a real exemplar for integrated health and care, where power is not only distributed within the community, but wholeheartedly shared and transferred to people. Tim Hollingsworth is the Chief Executive at Sport England, whose team work closely with us day in, day out across Greater Manchester, as together we try to create the conditions to support and enable active lives in every neighbourhood, locality and across the city region. Sport England wrote and launched their 10-year strategy with us in January in Uniting the Movement, and GM Moving in Action is our contribution to that national mission. Pritesh Patel is a Programme Manager from Bury Council. His role includes leading as part of the local pilot in Bury. Pritesh is one of the first local leaders I met when I started working here. His values, his leadership style and his approach, his desire to learn, adapt and grow has always struck me, as he's led the local pilot work as part of Bury Moving, and more recently has been a key part of the community response to COVID. And Eve Holt is Strategic Director for GM Moving and GreaterSport. She has led the strategy engagement, the writing and the production process this year, and she can be credited with an approach that has been more inclusive, heard more diverse voices, and has been co-written with a blended team of contributors from a wide range of organisations and places. Eve leads with great authenticity, care and energy for this work. So the purpose of this session this afternoon is for the panel to reflect on their learnings as they lead as part of the movement. So what does mission-focused leadership really take in practice? How can we develop our skills, our mindsets and our capabilities as adaptive system leaders working towards a shared purpose? What helps and what gets in the way? The aim is for an appreciative, positive, but honest dialogue that takes us deeper into the how of movement building. And I've asked each panelist to start with 2 minutes of just their personal reflections before we get into the discussion. Just to be aware that Andy will have to leave us for another event at 1:45, and after he's gone, we will hear some final reflections from the others before we close at 2 o'clock. So let's start with you, Andy. How are the legs, first of all? And then what is different for you about leading as part of the movement? What kind of leadership role do you play?
Well, thanks, Hayley. Afternoon, everybody. Sounds like you've had a great day so far. Am I allowed a little gloat, Hayley? Am I allowed to give my time for the Great North Run?
Absolutely, absolutely. Somebody has.
Well, it was under 2 hours, but I was wearing race number 1, so that creates a certain pressure. So hopefully I didn't crumple under the pressure. But it was just, I've just literally returned now this morning, and it kind of reminds you what we're all about on this call today. It was such a wonderful occasion up there, you know, the warmth of the people, we know that, but really it was just fantastic. People of all ages, just huge numbers out on the streets, really, really fantastic. So I guess the first reflection I would say is, you know, leading is doing is what I would say. I'm a big believer in that, you know, that leaders shouldn't just tell people how it should be. You've got to do it and show that you're prepared to be out there and, you know, lead by example, I guess. So I've always believed in that. I've tried to do that with homelessness and the work we've done there. You know, you've got to go out there and do it and see it. And I'm a big believer that all leaders should do that. You know, don't tell people how it should be. Go and do it yourself, and then hopefully lead by example. But to pick up on something you just said before, Hayley, leading is learning. I did make a daft comment about skateboarding, watching the Olympics a few weeks ago, and I think, my goodness, I paid for it. I can assure you, certainly for my kids more than anybody. They were the first ones to absolutely rip into me. And I guess the learning there is everyone's moving is different, isn't it? And that's the thing that came out wonderfully through Eve's poem. Everyone's choices are different, and everyone's choices are equally valid, aren't they? And it's about helping everybody to be able to enact those choices and learn. That's definitely a learning. I think in sport sometimes, particularly my own background, you can be very sort of judgmental about sports, you know, the ones that you think meet the test, the ones that you would sort of not. That's kind of been my sort of upbringing, if I'm honest. You know, quite traditional football, cricket, rugby league, but the boxing in that mix. But you've got to learn to sort of understand that actually can be excluding, to be honest. You know, people who just talk about sport in their context. So that's a big learning point. Everything, all movement is valid, and whatever people choose to do is to be supported. And you know, that is at the heart of GM Moving. Actually, you and Eve have brought that wonderfully actually here. So I'll just finish by a couple of other quick points. It's about, you know, leading is about high ambitions. I've always believed this. You know, you're not going to inspire people by saying, oh, we want to be the 10th best, most physically active city region in the country, or, you know, you've got to kind of, you know, set a big worthwhile ambition. So the best place in the country to grow up, get on and grow old is a phrase that's stuck with people. And I think that's what we are about creating Greater Manchester. And I think we are getting there, genuinely, I do. I think this is the best place to live in the country. But personally, I'm biased, but I just think it's absolutely wonderful to be part of what we're doing here. So high ambitions are absolutely what we should be about. You know, we don't aim to come second best in anything. in Greater Manchester. We always want to be the place that does things right and in the best way possible. So the high ambition that we have around the statistics, but also just making this, you know, the happiest place, the healthiest place, that's what we're all about. And leadership is about setting those high ambitions, but it's then also about seeing all ideas as valid as a way of meeting those ambitions. And I've always kind of referenced back, haven't I, to the brilliant thing that Rachel did when she suggested wearing trainers to work. You know, that was someone else's idea, but it's about leadership is about taking other people's ideas, I think, and then putting them right up there, because that is such an empowering thing for people to think that anyone can have an idea and it can then be brought absolutely to the forefront. It's what I've tried to do across the board, Hayley. You know, the idea for our pass came from somebody called Olivia Clark, a young person who was involved with Reclaim. A Bed Every Night came from Reverend Ian Rutherford, who suggested that we should open provision for homeless people every night because of the difference that you make when you do that. So I think devolution in Greater Manchester, just to finish, it is about the bottom up, isn't it? It is about the network. It empowers the more that you do sort of let ideas come right from the bottom. And good leadership is I think, spotting that and taking those ideas and putting them center stage. And you know, I think it's great that Jaweeda's on the call. You know, everything that the Alvanley practice has done. I think it's really important for leaders to say, right, that's great. So let's really lift that up and say, look at everybody, this is great. You know, again, that's, you know, leadership is picking the right examples or the right ideas and then really putting them in the spotlight. And we have tried to do that with Albany because they are brilliant. And I'll say that now, so you don't have to, Jaweeda. But no, I just feel it a privilege to be part of this movement. Everyone is leading it. Everyone is contributing to it. And I just think, you know, it's a model for public policy more broadly, actually, what GM Moving has achieved. So there we go. Those are probably way over 2 minutes, Hayley, and ruined your time frame.
Yeah, that's fine when it's...
I was under time on the 10K, the Great North Run, so you don't mind me being a bit over time on the speak.
Well done. Great time, by the way. That's impressive. So that takes us straight to you, Jaweeda, actually. Would you like to come back with your thoughts on what's different as leading as part of a movement and what kind of leadership role do you play?
So I suppose for me, leadership, whether it's at the practice level, at my Viaduct, which is the GP Federation level for Stockport, all 36 practices, where we employ 190 staff, or whether it's at Greater Manchester with the personalised care work, it's all the same. I think leadership is about listening, real generative listening to people. When you listen, you don't speak. So you're an elephant with big ears and a little mouth is what I always say to my trainees, and not a crocodile. So it's all about listening and putting yourself in other people's shoes, walking in their shoes. It's about true empathy, because you can only relate to people when you try to see things through their lens. And we do that at every level. It's about that culture of contribution then. And Andy talks about bottom up. And I absolutely believe in that, because in Alvanley, bottom up starts with our frontline staff, but it's much more than that. Actually starts with our patients. There's 6,000 patients in Alvanley. There were about 3,500 a few years ago. So it's just growing and growing and getting bigger. But when we talk to our patients, we used to sort of talk about an asset-based approach and all those kind of jargonistic words. But the reality is they know a lot more than I do, and they live with their conditions a lot longer than I would. They only see me for 10 or 15 minutes. So their leadership and their contribution is what's changed the practice, because they recognise, and we recognise maybe 3 to 4 years ago, you know, we were struggling as a practice. 1 in 5 people actually didn't have a medical need. And a lot of that was based on being lonely and being isolated. And so our patients, 18 incredible champions like Grandad Dave, came together. We've got our singing group, we've got our walking group, we've had the privilege that Andy came and opened our allotment and even sang happy birthday to my husband, which happened to be clashed with his birthday. It brings a lot of joy, because we know green spaces, we talked about this morning, we heard at the conference, green spaces as well. I'm very evidence-based, so Brown et al. Talks a lot about how green spaces help with our mental well-being, community cohesion, about how it enhances our activity and exercise levels, reduces dementia. For me, it's a no-brainer. Meeting those wider determinants that account for 90% of health outcomes that I can't even influence, is based on that. I want us to be a Marmot City. I want the Live Well manifesto to really mean something, because that's the only way as a GP I'm actually even going to survive. So you've got to create that culture of contribution. You have to value it. And I think the other thing is kindness. If you speak to Kay, our practice manager, to Grandad Dave, or any of our staff, they all talk about kindness, and that's all that really you need to do. You need to be kind. And sometimes we look at our big statutory organisations, and I don't always see a lot of kindness. Sometimes I see a lot of performance management. But if you get into a role and people hold you up as people have held me up, there's an opportunity to influence change. And maybe that's what I'm trying to do. So again, listen, think about what you can contribute, and really hold people up. Hold people up who are really receiving that service. I think that's probably it. Try to keep it in minutes, because honestly, I would talk forever.
Thanks, Jaweeda, that's brilliant. And so much in there that resonates. It is about all of us, and we've talked a lot about that this morning, and also about the how, like you say, the kindness and supporting each other, and knowing that people, you know, genuinely trying to do their best, aren't they? So thank you. I'm going to pass over to Tim now. So Tim Hollingsworth, what's different for you as leading as part of a movement and a collective mission, and what kind of leadership role do you play?
Well, good afternoon, Hayley. Hello, everyone. Congratulations, Andy. That's a very impressive time if it was under 2 hours. And definitely delighted to join you this afternoon. And, you know, reflecting that isn't actually my first GM Moving conference that I've managed to come and speak at. It's not at the Etihad, and we're not wearing our active soles today, or at least I am, but we can't show it under the desk. Very quickly, there's a lot of what's been said by Andy and by Jaweeda that I would agree with. But I think we're in the eye of the storm here a little bit with Sport England, in trying to shift, as you said, through uniting the movement, a whole way of thinking across sport and physical activity to make it part of people's lives on an everyday context, and to make it possible, to make it inclusive, and to make it fun. And that does mean an awful lot, as you've said, not just about what it is that we're doing, but how. In some ways, uniting the movement was set up as a revolution of the how, rather more than a revolution of the what. So that's where I'm fascinated now as chief executive, but for my whole organization and colleagues, thinking about, well, what role do we play then in this? Because if we were to try and transact our way to a change system, we would fail. But we know that actually, if we were to work alongside all the organizations in the sort of sports sector, but more importantly, as we're talking about today, how that can then link into people's communities and everyday lives, then it really does demand a different way of working. I've written down quite a lot in advance of today. I'm not going to say it all in 2 minutes, not least because I know we hate acronyms, but a friend of mine gave me an acronym over the weekend, which is WASTE, which is to say, why am I still talking? And I think it's a really good one to remember. But the three very quick things I've jotted down. I completely agree with Andy with the ambition and the goal. You know, uniting the movement at its heart is a manifesto. It's absolutely about, why does this matter to us all? What is our common purpose? And what is it we're all collectively seeking to achieve? And I think alignment behind that common goal is a principal starting point for successful collaboration. I definitely think as leaders, part of the job is to create the space for others. And that's quite hard sometimes, because we're normally encouraged to pitch in and do all the talking and make all the decisions and think all the thoughts. But actually it's making the space and then holding the space for others to actually feel that they can make a contribution, because that's where you learn, again, to Andy's point about the communities and Jaweeda as well. Knowing actually what the issues are very often will come from those who they're impacting. And so creating and holding space, I think, is the job of leadership now, as much as it is about knowing answers and feeling you have to make decisions in that sort of transactional way. And then I definitely think there's a last guiding principle for me, which is that we should always, though, be fixed down on the outcome. And actually, that's the trick in all of this that we're grappling with a bit now, because the conversation can take you in all sorts of directions and in all sorts of places, and it can often feel like they're valid and correct and right. But at the end of the day, we're still back here thinking, what can we do actually to create more activity? How can we work together to create that benefit to people's lives? And it's our job to allow and create that space, to make sure that voices are being heard, but also to make sure the vision that we've set is actually something that we can achieve. And that does come then down to, well, so what does this mean and how are we going to make it happen? So it's not contradictory to say that, but it's reflecting that one of the key things for me in holding the conversations that we're looking to have is to make sure that we have that purpose and that outcome at the heart at all times.
Thanks, Tim. That's certainly something that I can sort of share a view on in my own work, is that, you know, we're trying to grow a movement that gets bigger and bigger, and we're trying to set it free, and it is about all our collective leadership. As individuals and teams, we do also want to know very clearly what's our contribution to this, and how do we, you know, what do we get up each morning to do to make things happen. So yeah, I really relate to that as well. So Pritesh, would you like to share your reflections on the same question to begin with? What's different for you about leading as part of a bigger movement, and what kind of leadership role do you play?
Yeah, I think following on from Tim and Andy and Jaweeda, I think it is creating that space. I think the benefits of leading in a movement, we have a real advantage and a real possibility of changing that wider impact. You know, we know the advantages of physical activity in our sector, but the difference it can make to our communities and help with other agendas, such as the clean air agenda, supporting mental health. I think that bigger movement gives us a real possibility of doing things differently. For me, I love being part of the big movement because it increases my greater variety of views, different priorities that we can work towards. My role in terms of leadership, I think, like Andy was saying, I think it is really by leading by example, advocating and kind of talking the talk and walking the walk. So today I'm pleased to say I'm at a standing desk, trying to be a bit more active and not sat down. But then as a local pilot lead and working with our communities, I think as a lead I have a real responsibility to kind of translate some of the wider national and Greater Manchester strategies and bring them down to our community level and make them kind of understandable. And at the same point, you know, I'm very conscious, you know, I'm here to represent our communities and our residents and our leaders. So like Jaweeda said, you know, sometimes they've got the best ideas, they know more than I do. So it's sometimes translating that further up. A perfect example that we've got a community investment fund at the moment through the local pilot, and we've changed it because through the local pilot we can do things innovatively and differently. But we've changed it with help of our communities, and we put it out there, and we've got some more feedback. So we've got to be brave to be able to change it based on our communities and our residents and what they're saying. I think also my role is, I guess, sharing and celebrating great examples. Like Andy talks about, some of his great ideas have come from other people. So I think I have a real responsibility to share some of the great work that's going on in Bury communities, some of our fantastic Bury leaders and what they're doing for the benefit of our residents. I think the advantage is if we work together as a movement, we can have a big change for our residents in a real positive way.
Thanks, Pritesh. Great points there. And over to you, Eve. What's your learnings on leading in a movement, and what kind of leadership role you can play?
Yeah, I guess first of all, the question was what's different about leading in a movement, and having helped design the question, then realised I had to answer it. And I guess it's different from what, and the assumption is it's different, isn't it, from our government generally, local government ways of working. It's different from the way often traditional organisations work. But actually, I think leading in a movement isn't that different to how we organise within our communities, within our families, within social networks. So it's recognising that there's a whole load of strengths and ways of organising that I think we're just drawing on and learning now. Actually, these are really effective. And maybe those ways of sort of project managing or programme managing that actually have sometimes created these artificial barriers and structures and rigidity that doesn't always work. It's important for some things, so it's not to say we have to throw that out, quite the opposite. We have to also look at when there's times that we need to adopt what is a far more fluid way of working, which movement is. So it's, you know, whether you take the sort of murmuration or I like to think of dancing because I like to dance. So for me, it's, you know, how do you invite absolutely everybody onto the dance floor? And when you dance, you know that you're constantly stepping forward, stepping back, stepping to the side. You're kind of absorbing the moves of people around you. You're inspired by what their moves are, and you create this sort of harmony between you, really, which is great. So yeah, I'll pick the dance metaphor. I guess in terms of my role, back to what others said, there's multiple roles, aren't there? So there's a GM role, which is, you know, the lingo currently seems to be system convener, which I think really just means bringing people together across different boundaries, whether that is place boundaries or whether that's around different communities of identity or interest, or guess different structures or informal structures and structures. And there's a real need, I think, now as we've kind of got increased fragmentation, really, to think about how we do come together. And that's, you know, everybody else in this panel, that's what I see you all do in different places. It's convening people around a common goal. And then you have to be able to help translate for those different people and different audiences, this kind of find a common language, a common purpose, a common goal that you can pull people together around, so that collectively we really can all make a contribution. And that does require everything that everybody else has said. It requires that empathy, it requires listening, helping other people to listen and have empathy, not being the knowers, not being the experts, being able to be curious, to be compassionate, to be creative, to celebrate what's good and to have the courage to put that into action. So yeah, it's learning all the way and adapting. It's good fun.
Thank you, everybody. Some great thoughts there. I'm going to follow up again back to you, Andy. So in your experience, what kind of leadership is needed to achieve the wider ambitions of Greater Manchester? And how do you see Greater Manchester moving, sort of further contributing to and embracing this approach?
I think it's everything that we've been talking about, Hayley. You know, as Eve was just saying, I think devolution is an opportunity to take a step away from some of that traditional top-down style of leadership, and, you know, do what we like to say we do, which is to do things differently, but really mean it. And I've kind of tried to put in place now a way of replicating what's been achieved through GM moving and homelessness. I would say they're the two prime examples that I've got of how we've created a true network. I mean, there is a homelessness action network, just to, you know, to sort of take it into that context for a minute, which has really linked people together. And I think that the thing for me that I've learned from that was that the voluntary sector can actually be quite competitive itself, if you like. It can be quite territorial. But when you kind of set a high ambition and then get everyone pulling in the same direction, as Eve was saying, convening, so that, you know, everyone is kind of, you know, all focus is moving in the same way. I've noticed that real change can happen when that happens, and it has done with homelessness. You know, we are in such a stronger position than we were, and so I've tried to do that on other missions for the city. So, you know, No Child Goes Hungry. I want to build out a network that can make sure that becomes a reality, and it can be. You know, it's perfectly achievable. It's a big ambition, but it's an achievable ambition. And I think that's the leadership there is important in that, isn't it? Set high ambitions, but that are actually doable. You know, end rough sleeping was and is a tough ambition, but it is actually doable if you really put your mind to it. But we've also got, I'm about to go to a meeting this afternoon of our digital inclusion network. So we're trying to replicate the same approach in different areas. I believe all under 25s in our city region should be supported to be online. I just don't see how they're going to be the best that they can be unless we're helping them get access to all of the information, the opportunities that are out there. So that again is the same thing. We're asking everybody, all sectors, public, private, voluntary, faith, to kind of play their part in this bigger mission. So that's what we're trying to do. And so you should be very proud, all of you involved in GM moving, because the sort of template you've set is kind of, we're trying to move it to other areas of Greater Manchester policy. And the idea always is that, someone's thought or thing can kind of lifted right from the bottom and then elevated right up to the top. It's an inclusive approach. I think that's how you level up in the end. I think leveling up as a concept needs to start with people. If it's tried to be done top down, as everybody's saying, it will fail, definitely. And I think we're trying as best we can to implement this philosophy across the way we're using devolution in Greater Manchester. I think the best change is bottom-up change, because it's done with rather than to, isn't it? And therefore the ownership people have of the change is much stronger. So therefore it will be more durable. So I think we're touching the surface at it, but I think the more that the public bodies of Greater Manchester, it's great to hear what Pritesh was saying, completely related to it, the more that we can really get people to buy into that, I think the more powerful this will become. Coming out of the pandemic, we've all got to really ask ourselves, what actually does lift our people in our communities, what gives people everyday well-being. And I think it is about a very different approach to the way we provide support to people. and being much more open to the informal as opposed to the very formal provision of support or services through the sort of bureaucracy of public services. I think there's a much greater value on the informal and supporting people to connect with each other. You know, I think Jaweeda just touched on it. I've got this thought for a live well service in Greater Manchester, so that we structure in all 10 boroughs. We move away from the language of prescribing and social prescribing, but we do move into the territory of live well, you know, and then building that mission approach around that, the network of individuals and organisations who are going to deliver that. And I would want physical activity to be absolutely, you know, absolutely at the heart of that. I've said to you before, Hayley, but I will just say it again before I leave today's session. I personally feel strongly that we need to promote more regular physical activity as not so much being good for people's physical health. That's been the message we've always given, and it's been about weight and not, and I'm not sure that's that appealing, to be honest. It doesn't connect with a lot of people. I think we've got to promote it for the mental health benefits. If you move more, you will feel better every day. You will feel more able to cope. You will feel more positive about things. That is the effect that physical activity has. You will be able to live well. You'll be able to live better, live well. So a live well service in Greater Manchester, you know, structuring that instant support we can provide to people in all of our communities to make a change in any day, and then, you know, meet more people, do more movement. That's what we've got. Keep it simple. That's what we've got to be about, you know, learning from all of the things that we've learned over the last 4 years. Well, it's a long answer there, but it's a really, you know, it's a really important question. This is for me how devolution will succeed in the long run, if it truly unlocks this kind of decision making and this kind of involvement in our communities, and moves away from a sort of slightly finger wagging message, or, you know, it's like, you know, you must, you should, we, you know. I just think that's definitely going to be the way to go.
Brilliant. That's people power. And the last session of this afternoon is all about that. It's all about how we involve local people and growth strengths and capabilities of people and communities. So that's perfect. A little teaser for this afternoon's session. I'm going to
just before I leave it though, Hayley, because I'm going to probably have to swing off in a second.
Yeah, sure.
I don't want anyone though to think that I'm avoiding, you know, some of the things that we do have to have traditional decision making around. For instance, pavements, cycling and walking provision. I'm going to launch a Green Spaces Fund soon, recognising that, you know, we do need to smarten up our green spaces in Greater Manchester. Just no two ways about it. You know, they need to be better, cleaner. You know, to give that spaces where people can live well. So I don't want it to sound like it's all over to you and it's all big society and all. You know, there are things that the public sector needs to do, working with Tim and his colleagues, to get the money in, to provide the facilities, the places, the spaces where people can do all of this. And that is a thing that we've got to take responsibility for. We've got to drive, we've got to make the decisions properly, listening to views. So that lives there. But I think when it comes to letting people fill those spaces, that is a different thing altogether. And that has got to be about what everything Jaweeda was saying, just go with what people want to do and don't be prescriptive. So sorry, I just thought I'd better say that in case it sounds like
I think that's a really important point, actually, because it's another a reminder really of it's not an either or this, and there's so many of these things in this work. It's not either this or that, it's both and. So it's both local leadership and it's decision making and formal structures and powers, etc. So you're absolutely right to raise that point as well. It's not passing the book. It's all of us. So thanks ever so much, Andy. I know you've got to leave in a few minutes, so stay as long as you can and listen in. And I really, really appreciate your time today. So thanks very much. And I'm going to come to you next, Jaweeda, because you work at a neighbourhood and a locality in the Greater Manchester level, and yet also have influence right across the Northwest and across the country. So in your experience, what kind of leadership enables real impact for the well-being and the communities that you work with? And also what gets in the way of that, in your view?
So I suppose I might just start with an example, really. So at Alvanley, we made a decision that we don't want to just ask people what matters to them, although we have done that. We've done a survey of thousands of our patients who have come back and actually they've told us what matters to them, which is kindness, compassion, community. Not many talked about access to GP appointments, which was quite interesting in the survey, but I'm sure we didn't word it differently. We took that information and we asked our practice champions to lead. So this isn't just partnership or co-production, it's patient leadership. And the only way you can get that is by making sure you've got genuine shared decision-making or informed decision-making. So we presented to them all the data from the practice, our prevalence, our disease prevalences, our activity levels, a really good breadth of understanding of our demographics. And they all listened and they all watched and they asked lots and lots of questions. And then I was the facilitator and I asked them, what would they like the practice to prioritise as our 3 strategic objectives? And they came up with 3 objectives for our practice. One, they recognised from the data that there was a gap on blood pressure. So we should have a prevalence of around 30% for hypertension, but only had 19. And they said, well, what can we do? Because we know, and they understood that blood pressure was related to heart attacks and strokes, and prevention has got to be the key. You know, we don't want to be treating people who are ill. We want to prevent illness. We want to move to a paradigm of wellness, not illness. And so they're going to work with our healthcare assistant, and there was a key person identified. They're going to find a way, working in the community with our social enterprise partner, going into the bookies where a lot of people go, or going into the Woodley Arms, or going into the allotment and offering a way of monitoring those blood pressures and raising that prevalence. That will save hundreds of lives. The other priority they came up with is they understood that 80% of the patients we're seeing in the practice, it was the other way around, 20% of the patients we're seeing in the practice took up 80% of our appointments. So they want to work with our link worker, Rod, who is incredible, to start to identify those people and support them and see what it matters to them, apply that personalised care approach and how they can support them with our community offer, our wellbeing offer and activities, because there must be something that we're not getting right if they're needing to consult that often, particularly if they're unhappy or they've got a low level of depression, one that doesn't quite require treatment, but does require support. And as Andy and others have said, activity actually improves levels of depression, it reduces levels of dementia, it has a significant impact on people's well-being. So getting people involved in activity is key. And then the third priority they set was they were keen to understand the medical record, because there's lots of strategic talk about a shared medical record and sharing it between the hospital and practices and ambulance crews and everywhere. Well, they said it's our record. Why can't we just have it and we'll share it wherever we go and wherever we need to? So this is going to be hard, but we're going to start to work to make sure not that they just use the NHS app to get their repeat prescriptions, which they've all been sort of, supported each other to do, but much more than that, they understand their medical record and they can share it in a meaningful way. Or when they go to a hospital appointment, they can talk to the consultant, having a copy of their letter and understanding what that means. So this is very much about that person-centered approach, and it only happens one person at a time. But what are the barriers? I think the barriers are often that we do have a top-down sort of, you will do this, you will create a data sharing agreement, you must have this objective or tick box. And although it's good and it's important, the solution always sits with the community. They have all the answers. And in Viaduct, we've done the same. I go to the inductions and I've asked all our frontline staff to write down what matters to them. At the induction, they get a load of post-its. And once we collated it for our 190 staff, we came up with their values, and the acronym was CARE, and the C was compassion, contribution, collaboration. The A was ambition, the R was respect, responsiveness, and then the E was empathy and excellence. And that all came from frontline staff. That's what mattered to them, because that gave them purpose, and Tim talked about purpose. And so once we got those values at Viaduct, my job in the board was to make sure how the board upholds our frontline staff's values and how are we going to contribute to make that happen. And in terms of inclusion, both at Alvanley and Viaduct, because you make change happen one person at a time. Our apprentices in Alvanley have come from different backgrounds. Mostly those are protected characteristics, or our current apprentice is a care leaver, and she's going to become a healthcare assistant, and we're going to train her to support her to do that. And we've had another one who was a who came from a Bengali community in Hyde. She didn't have a GCSE. We helped her with that, a healthcare assistant qualification, and she's just completed a second year at John Moores University in nursing. So we can contribute even as a practice, and Viaduct can contribute because we're going to have associative NEDs. We're going to have an opportunity to create recruitment and retention that is reflective of our population. And one of the disappointments for me, I have to say, and I don't often say things that are disappointing, but when I look at our big hospitals and when I look at the GMCA or the Health and Social Care Partnership, I don't always see that inclusion and diversity that is reflective of our communities. And I think if you want real innovation and change to happen, that's where it's going to happen, because the most diverse, inclusive leaderships, you can read Forbes, you can read Harvard, they all say the same, your productivity and your success rates, your financial benefits come from organisations that are diverse, almost 20% more so.
Yeah. Thank you. No, it's a really, really good point there. And I'm struck in all of what you've said there with another C, which is about courage. And I don't know whether Tim and Pritesh and Eve perhaps at the end can reflect on courage within all of this. So thank you, Jaweeda. Over to you then, Tim. So how does this all translate in terms of leading, uniting the movement across the whole of England, and what makes for effective leadership in your view?
It's been fascinating. I think there are a couple of things that I would want to highlight really that relate both to our sense of leadership through uniting the movement at Sports England, and then generally understanding the role of leadership in a collaborative environment where, you know, the reason for the collaborative environment is exactly what's been laid out: the ability to meet people where they're at, to understand difference and diversity, to completely benefit from the wisdom of others in making decisions that are going to affect those people and their lives. So all of what's been said, I think for me, it comes down to two things in terms of leadership, and it's for Sport England to adopt particularly. One is to really get clarity around, within the context of that collaboration, the various roles and responsibilities that people feel they can bring. You know, it isn't about everyone having exactly the same view. It isn't about everyone playing exactly the same role. You know, good collaboration is a contact sport sometimes. You need to feel like actually the balance of how people are engaging is that there's disagreement about things, because you've created the space with the values that you, and I couldn't agree more. The first thing I wanted to do when I came to Sport England was create a set of values around which we could do all of our work. That was before the strategy and before the delivery of that strategy. It was what were the values against which we're going to set our work, and we put that as a priority, because if you do have that environment, then you can have the sort of discussion that can affect change. And as I said in my first remarks, you know, lead to outcomes, get to points where you're making differences, as opposed to, you know, only understanding the nature of the problem. It's actually then leading you to the answers and the solutions that you need. But I think the biggest point for us as Sport England is also for any individual going into this environment. It's kind of like, well, what's the role of resource here? Because, I mean, Andy touched on it in terms of top-down hierarchical local government, and everyone's very familiar with a model where almost the levers of power belong to those who've got either the cash, if it's cash, or the people, you know, or the influence, or whatever. Resource is really important to think about up front, because resource can be hugely powerful to creating the right environment for change. Very often we're finding now in our role that actually our ability to spend, what was historically Sport England's role was to spend money on programs, on things you could buy, on X to Y, you know, moments. And to Andy's point again, in some cases it still is. I mean, at the end of the day, there are some things where it's valuable to do that. But increasingly we found, and the local delivery pilot mechanism that we've had in the last few years, Manchester is a brilliant example of this. It's actually not so much about that, but about the connectivity that resource can provide, and the capacity that resource can provide, and the way that it can buy time, space, and energy for people, as opposed to just a program. So, you know, and we can be talking about people, we can be talking about money, we can be talking about time. You know, resource is critical, and understanding the nature of the resource that's available in any decision making. So I would say definitely what we're learning is, what's our role in Sport England? How do we create the space for the conversation? How do we meet people where they're at? How do we get that common cause and that purpose in terms of the advocacy for why it matters in people's lives? And then what's the role of the resource that we have to maximize the impact of that? When does it come to bear? to deliver a program, or set up a fund, or make resource available for some capital improvements or facilities based, or all the practical things that still people need in their in their communities. But more importantly, what's the role of resource in terms of creating space, in creating capacity, and giving people the opportunity to have the conversations and the engagement? Because then you realize that you corral the real resource that matters, which is community-led, which is bottom-up, and actually is the thing that can make the change. But very often that's stymied by the fact that it's to either chasing the pots of money that are available, or restricted in what it can do. So my view definitely is that's what we're learning. What's our role, and how do we use the resource that's at our disposal to support our hopefully common purpose in getting the nation to move more?
Brilliant, thank you. And that's a perfect segue into Pritesh, because I guess I'm interested in what you've heard then, how this translates at a local level. So what Tim was just saying there. Is there anything else that you would add, Pritesh, in terms of the leadership that you've seen that makes a real difference at that community level?
Yeah, I think, like you mentioned, Hayley, I think being a local authority officer, at the start of the pandemic, I was drafted across to help with our COVID response work, and that was, in some ways, it was a real privilege to work with some of our communities in a different way. But I think I was lucky enough, working through the pandemic and working through our emergency response, having the opportunity to work with so many more different community groups and leaders and volunteers. And I really like what Jaweeda said about one person at a time. For me, there are so many leaders in our communities, and some of them don't recognise themselves as leaders. We had neighbours helping each other, community groups, food banks. They all stepped up when our residents and our communities needed it. So I think for me that's really important to think about the wider context and the wider communities. I also, through the pandemic, we were lucky, we all had to adapt and work in different ways. So one of the ways we working with our food banks and all those families who were coming to get their food parcels, we set up a program called Fit and Fed. So not only did people come to pick up their food banks, but they had a chance to talk to us about their challenges, their motivations, and we helped them with around family activities, things they could do with us in that short period of time, but ideas they could take home and continue to be active. Because we know the difference, like Andy said, it can make to them in terms of their mental health, their energy levels, and even in the height of the pandemic, the mundane of just being in your home, getting used to that kind of new routine. I think also, in terms of translating at a local level, I think it is really recognising that leaders come in so many different forms, and some of our leaders don't recognise themselves as leaders, and some of them don't want to be leaders and don't want that responsibility of the title of the leader. But in our eyes, they are leaders. We have a lady called Hayley who, I guess her priority was just finding somewhere safe for her kids to play. And, through working with Lucy, one of our team, she's really adopted the kind of play streets ethos. And she's going out there knocking on her neighbour doors, finding out what they would like to do, find out if they're open to this idea. She's also introducing us to other local families who we previously may not have been engaged with. So leaders like that really make a difference. And then there was another example last week where I was speaking to one of our previous I Will If You Will ambassadors. I Will If You Will was a program helping women and girls to be more active, have fun in their everyday lives. And Deborah told me she misses being that ambassador, but for me, she's still that ambassador because she leads by example. She's motivating her colleagues to be more active. She works in the NHS, so she's helping patients to be more active. She's helping her family be more active. She's still a leader, but through a change of her responsibilities and maybe her life, she doesn't see that, but she is. And she then proceeded to tell me about stuff she was doing now. And funnily enough, she's helping people to be active. It's fantastic. So I think one of the key things is thinking about there's different types of leaders, and not everyone recognises themselves as a leader, and that's okay. But how do we help them to achieve what they want to do in their communities?
Yeah, absolutely. You remind me of Phil and Linda where I live, who do everything and still don't think they're leaders and they can read the whole place. So thanks, Pritesh, that's great. I'm going to come to you, Eve, really, to kind of wrap up your final thoughts on what you've heard and what you think this all means for our next steps and where we go with GM moving.
No pressure. There's a lot there. And I guess yeah, just the importance of within Greater Manchester. I think over the last few years, those conditions have shifted. And I think a key part of that is around trust in people and hearing people's names and hearing all these stories about people in communities, and that real belief about growing power in communities and agency. So I think those are the key things. I think we have to be really honest about where maybe sometimes we get in the way of that actually, and we squash that agency and we control it, or we create barriers. So something about honesty, and it goes back to your point about courage, so that being honest about what's getting in the way, being honest about the things that we aren't doing well enough yet. We've got a mission, haven't we? We've got, Active Lives for All is a big mission, and that is key to contributing to good lives for all in GM. It's key to our health crisis, it's key to our environmental crisis, it's key to tackling inequality. So we need to be unapologetic about that, and we need the courage to go where it's hard. So I guess listening to all of you, it feels like there's a real sense of how, as leaders, we have that courage to look at where the resources go, and to be honest that sometimes we spend a lot of time, sort of worrying about small amounts of money going directly to the hands of people. And actually, if we're going to create that space that you talk about, Tim, and enable people to lift their head, and that resource and that capacity and that time and that energy that particularly Jaweeda and Pritesh have talked about, that people in communities making a difference, we have to enable that to happen. And that means being able to kind of let the resources flow to different places and trust that good stuff will flow out of that. So I think, how we build advocacy across the system and be really honest and have that courage to go there, and to recognise there's going to be conflict. There's conflict over allocation of space, allocation of resources, and we have to hold those spaces for that conflict. Just as Tim said, it is a contact sport, and we need to be kind to people in the process and have the empathy, but to recognise if we're not rocking the boat at all, we're probably not doing something right, because we're not going to deliver that transformational shift to a paradigm of wellness, as you beautifully describe it, Jaweeda.
Thanks, Eve. That was very, very ably done. I'm conscious it's 2 o'clock, so apologies to anybody who's got to head off at this point. But I would just like, if all the panelists just give me a nod if you're able to stay on for just a few minutes longer. Great. Okay, we're going to play the new Keep Moving video now, but then I'm going to come back to you, and I'm going to literally give you 1 sentence each on what have you heard today and what are you going to take away. So 2 sentences. What have you heard today that's resonated for you, and what are you going to take away for your own leadership? But I'm going to give you 30 seconds of a video, if Nicole's ready, to give you time to think before we move on.
Being active for 30 minutes every day? No chance. But what if we found the time? A few minutes here and a few minutes there. So while you're making a brew, or catching up on your day, while you're cooking up a storm, or when the kids are giving you the runaround, let's find those 30 minutes where we can and keep moving.
Brilliant. So that's part of a new public facing campaign that we're launching today, with messages for the whole community. So you'll be seeing this stuff on billboards and on the radio and on TV across Greater Manchester in the coming weeks. So all of what we've talked today is about leadership and people and workforce development, isn't it? So we've got a whole load of work going on with Sport England and locally around system leadership, around growing assets and communities, and there'll be all sorts of stuff to follow on from today around collective leadership. So do stay in touch around this particular topic. I'm going to go the other way around. I'm going to bring Pritesh out now. I'm going to go the other way around this time. Pritesh, what have you heard that's resonated, and what are you going to take away? 2 sentences.
I think one of the things that I was really pleased to hear that kind of made me jump for joy when Andy talked about the GM kind of live well model. In Bury, we set up a live well service, and we're trying to help our residents kind of move more, live well, in lots of different ways. So I think the one thing that's resonated with me is that I think it's what Jaweeda said, of kind of one person at a time. And I think Russ said it earlier today, that it's being brave and having that courage. I think you mentioned earlier in today's session that these things take time. They are time, resource, labour intensive, but I think we all need to be brave and show the courage to carry on. And I think the more people that do that enables others to be brave and have that courage as well.
Thank you. And come to you, Jaweeda, next.
So what I've heard is about that culture of contribution and recognizing that if you have a culture of contribution that involves the people who receive services or people who live in communities, the culture of contribution where that you don't need a hierarchy, leadership comes from that community. And what I've heard from Pritesh, Tim, Eve and Andy is that GM Moving is an opportunity for us to create community cohesion, really. And it has in Alvanley. You see that when people go for their practice walks or go and work in the allotment, they're people that didn't know each other before, and now they share their stories, but they also hold each other up. So yeah, I think a culture of contribution is absolutely what's important, but valuing the contribution that everybody makes. And I think I certainly don't ever see myself as a leader. I always see myself led, to be honest. And my job is to hold others up.
Thank you. I'll come to you next, Steve.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I'd forgotten I've got my necklace on, which says courage calls to courage everywhere. So I guess my key takeaway is just it's the continual lesson really of every day, isn't it? To just park the fear or deal with the fear and be fearless. To have that courage to go where it is hard and to have the clarity really around. I think there's such alignment from all the things we've heard from people over the last year that I feel really clear about what people want to have happen. It's not going to be easy, but to have that courage to go, come on, we can do it and we have to do it. So let's get there together and have that clear call to action to join in that Jaweeda describes.
Thank you. And I would just say, in terms of feel the fear, and before we give the final words to Tim, I just want to say a huge thank you to the tech support control room behind today's session, because that was feeling the fear at the beginning of today, and you've delivered brilliantly and got everyone back in the room. So well done. And yeah, courage calls to courage everywhere. And Tim, I'm going to let you have the final word, if that's all right. What have you heard today that you're going to take away into your leadership?
Of course, I should say from the tech side as well, they also embrace that truly collaborative spirit as well. We're, involving us all in the challenge and the problem, and making sure that we were on side. The most important thing I've heard today is the conversation, and that sounds really trite, but it is not to underestimate how important it is that across communities, and in this case across some of the leadership and really important local leaders in Greater Manchester, that this is the nature of the conversation that we're having. We're having a conversation about this ability to influence change, and make improvements that are sustainable and real through actually embracing a different way of working towards that end product. And I don't think we can underestimate that at all in terms of where we're at. And I think it's hugely exciting. It's fundamentally why I'm so passionately behind our own ambition and the ambition of GM Moving and the way that we want to work with you as Sport England in that, but far more the way that we just understand that it is the communities themselves who know the answers to the problems that we're seeking to address. So in thinking that, I guess the thing I'll take away is a real excitement and energy for the fact that we're not in isolation having a conversation about, the revolution of the how can we have a different conversation about the same answers, basically, or, and get to the answers that we know that we need in a different way. But that we still need to understand the roles that we can collectively play, and that actually there is a courage still to ensure that is part of the conversation. What's our role? How can we help? How can we contribute? Because the danger of the conversation otherwise is that it's left to others, and it really can't be. I think as leaders of organisations that are involved, whether that's locally or nationally, we have to understand our role. But fundamentally, the sort of shared purpose here around what it is we're trying to achieve and how to achieve it is a conversation that I think is, incredibly valuable in itself, because, that old transactional, mechanistic, top-down, bureaucratic sense of right, has been the pervading way of working for a long time and remains something that can feel quite insuperable at times. And it really mustn't be, because only then can we meet people where they're at, and as many have said and Jaweeda brought to life, genuinely feel that it's actually communities, coming up with the solutions that are needed.
Thank you. And just before we finish, I just want to say a personal thanks, and thanks on behalf of everyone in GM, Tim, because just referring back to the award Organisation of the Year that Sport England received last week, and a genuine heartfelt thank you, because the last 18 months in particular, but for a long time here, you know, you guys have been living out your values, you know, in everything that you do, and you genuinely in the work alongside us, day in, day out, in the case of Justine and Kate. But lots of your team very, very involved in all of the work. So a real big thank you for the way that you've gone about leading through this last really difficult period. So thank you. I'm going to ask Kaz to share the slide of the next session, just to point you to where we're going next. The Zoom link should all be fine according to the chat. And please do come back. We've got a break now. Please do take off your slippers and put on your active soles and get out and get some air between now and the next session at 3 o'clock. It's about how we make change happen. We've got a brilliant panel, and I really would encourage you to come back and get involved in that session. So do enjoy your break. Thanks ever so much to all the speakers and to the control room, and we'll see you back here at 3 o'clock.